Ambassador Kethter of the Zephyrian Collective, stood before the massive holographic display in the Grand Council. Chambers on Nexus Prime, the three-dimensional map of known space floated before him like a glowing jewel, showing the intricate web of trade routes, colonies, and territorial boundaries that connected dozens of species across the galaxy. Blue lines marked safe passage routes while red zones indicated areas of conflict or environmental hazards. Green dots represented thriving worlds while yellow ones showed developing colonies still under Federation protection. But there was something about this map that had always bothered him, something that nagged at the back of his mind every time he attended these monthly council meetings. The map had a distinct edge, a place where all charted space simply ended as if the galaxy itself stopped existing beyond that point. "The human territories?" whispered his aide, a young Zephyrian named Velanara, following his gaze to the peculiar boundary. "No one maps beyond that border." Kethter had served as an ambassador for over 40 standard years, representing his people in countless negotiations and treaties. He had watched the Federation grow from a small alliance of 5 species to the mighty coalition of 37 worlds it was today. Yet in all those years, he had never questioned why the galactic cartographers consistently left human space as the final frontier on every official map. The humans had joined the Galactic Federation only 30 years ago, arriving as newcomers with their small cluster of systems in what everyone assumed was the outer rim of the galaxy. The Zephyrians had been mapping space for over 2 centuries before the humans even developed faster-than-light travel. The Corvens had been explorers for even longer, sending their survey ships to the farthest reaches of known space. The Hive Collective had spread across dozens of systems, always pushing outward, always seeking new worlds to colonize. Yet somehow, all their explorations seemed to stop at the same invisible line where human space began. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the human representative on the Cartographic Council, noticed his prolonged stare from across the chamber. She was a small woman by human standards, with dark hair streaked with silver and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge. She approached with her characteristic calm demeanor, her footsteps silent on the polished floor of the council chamber. "Something troubling you, Ambassador?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight accent that marked her as originating from one of the human core worlds. Kethter turned to face her, his scaled features reflecting his confusion. "The maps," he said carefully, gesturing toward the holographic display. "They always end at your space. What lies beyond?" Elena's smile was polite but carried an undertone that made Kethter's scales prickle with unease. There was something in her expression, a weight behind her eyes that spoke of secrets too heavy for casual conversation. "Nothing that concerns the Federation, Ambassador? Nothing at all." The answer struck him as odd. In his decades of diplomatic service, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when someone was not telling the complete truth. Elena's response was technically accurate, but it felt like a door being firmly closed rather than a genuine answer. "But surely your people have explored beyond your current borders," Kethter pressed gently. "The Terran Defense Force has some of the most advanced ships in the Federation. Your exploration vessels are legendary for their range and capabilities." Elena's expression remained pleasant, but something shifted in her eyes. "We've explored what we needed to explore, Ambassador. The Federation has plenty of space to grow into without worrying about the regions beyond our territory." Velanara, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "But the star charts show that human space extends into regions that should connect to the outer spiral. The gravitational readings suggest there are star systems beyond your borders that could support life." "Gravitational readings can be misleading," Elena replied smoothly. "Space is vast, and not all of it is suitable for colonization or even safe for exploration. Some regions are better left alone." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Corvan representative, Commander Zixtel, whose blue-skinned features showed the curiosity that was characteristic of his species. "Are we discussing the boundary question again?" he asked, having clearly overheard the conversation. "It's not really a question," Elena said firmly. "It's simply a matter of practical boundaries." Every species has limits to their expansion, and the Federation respects those limits. But Kethter had spent too many years in diplomatic circles to be satisfied with such responses. He had noticed that whenever the topic of human space boundaries came up in council meetings, the discussion was quickly redirected to other matters. He had observed that survey missions were never authorized to explore beyond human territory, and that even scientific expeditions were politely discouraged from venturing too close to the human border regions. Has the Federation ever requested permission to send scientific missions beyond human space? He asked. Elena's pause was barely noticeable, but Kethter caught it. The Federation has never seen the need for such missions. We have plenty of unexplored space in other directions. As the council session began and the delegates took their seats, Kethter found himself unable to focus on the day's agenda. The mystery of the maps gnawed at him, and Elena's carefully neutral responses only deepened his suspicions. For the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if the Federation was being told the complete truth about the galaxy they all shared. The holographic map continued to glow before them, showing the known galaxy in all its complexity. But that strange edge where human space marked the boundary of all charted territory seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets, as if the map itself was trying to tell them something that the humans preferred to keep hidden. Captain Jake Morrison of the Federation survey ship Constellation had always prided himself on being thorough in his work. When the Galactic Survey Division assigned him to investigate what they called navigational anomalies near human space, he assumed it would be routine stellar cartography work, the kind of mission where they would spend a few weeks taking sensor readings, updating star charts, and filing reports that would gather dust in some bureaucratic archive. His mixed-species crew had been working together for over 2 years, and Jake trusted them completely. His first officer, Commander Lisa Thompson, was a human engineer who had transferred from the Terran Defense Force just 2 years prior. She was skilled with both Federation and human technology, making her invaluable on missions that required technical precision. Also aboard were the Corvan science officer Zixtal, whose species was renowned for their analytical abilities, and the insectoid communications specialist Chikara from the Hive Collective, whose compound eyes could detect energy patterns that other species missed entirely. The Constellation was a good ship, built for long-range exploration with sensors that could map stellar phenomena from several light-years away. Jake had commanded her through dozens of routine surveys, mapping nebulae, cataloging planetary systems, and updating the Federation's ever-growing database of galactic knowledge. This mission had seemed no different when they received their orders 3 weeks ago. The sensor readings are unusual, Zixtal reported as they approached the edge of human territory. His blue-skinned features showed concentration as he studied the data flowing across his console. There appears to be some kind of interference pattern along the entire border. Jake moved to look over the science officer's shoulder. The readings were indeed strange, showing energy signatures that didn't match any known natural phenomena. Could it be some kind of stellar formation we haven't encountered before? Negative, Captain, Zixtal replied, his voice carrying the certainty that came from years of scientific training. The pattern is too regular, too consistent. This appears to be artificial in origin. Lisa checked her console, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced efficiency. Jake noticed that she seemed less surprised by the readings than he would have expected. It's not interference, Zixtal. It's a barrier. A very sophisticated one. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jake turned to his first officer, studying her expression for clues. Lisa, what aren't you telling us? I'm telling you everything. I'm authorized to tell you, Captain, she replied, her voice steady but her eyes apologetic. But I strongly recommend we request permission from Terran Command before proceeding any further. Jake had worked with Lisa long enough to know when she was holding back information. Her use of the word authorized suggested there were things she knew but couldn't share. Lisa, we're a Federation vessel on a Federation mission. We don't need permission from Earth to conduct our surveys. Captain, with respect, this isn't just any survey area, Lisa said carefully. The regions beyond this point are under special jurisdiction. I really think we should contact Terran Command. Before Jake could respond, the communications array crackled to life. Chikara's compound eyes widened as multiple signals began flooding their receivers. Captain, we're being hailed on multiple frequencies. The signals are coming from positions all along the border. The main view screen flickered as an incoming transmission took priority over all other signals. The voice that emerged was unmistakably human, but it carried an authority that seemed to transcend normal military protocols. Federation vessel constellation. This is Admiral Kate Stevens of the Terran Deep Space Defense Grid. You are approaching restricted space. Please state your intentions. Jake exchanged glances with his crew. He had never heard of the Terran Deep Space Defense Grid, and the title suggested a military organization that operated beyond normal Federation oversight. Admiral Stevens, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Federation Survey Ship Constellation. We're conducting routine stellar cartography under orders from the Galactic Survey Division. There was a pause before the Admiral responded. Captain Morrison, I'm going to need to speak with your first officer immediately. Commander Thompson, please respond. Lisa stepped forward, her posture shifting to something more formal. Admiral Stevens, this is Commander Thompson reporting. Commander, what is your security clearance level? Level 7, Admiral. Another pause. That's not high enough for this conversation, Commander. Captain Morrison, I'm going to need you to stand down your survey operations immediately. This area is off-limits to all Federation vessels without proper authorization. Jake felt his temper rising. Admiral, I have legitimate orders from the Federation Survey Division to map this region. I'm not aware of any restrictions on our operations. Captain, the restrictions exist whether you're aware of them or not, Admiral Stevens replied firmly. I'm transmitting coordinates for a meeting point within Federation space. You will proceed there immediately and await further instructions. And if I refuse? The silence that followed was more ominous than any threat could have been. When Admiral Stevens spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Captain, you won't refuse. Commander Thompson, please escort your captain to the coordinates I'm transmitting. We need to have a conversation. As the transmission ended, Jake turned to Lisa with growing frustration. What's going on here, Lisa? What is the Terran Deep Space Defense Grid and why haven't I heard of it? Lisa's expression was troubled. Jake. There are things about human space that aren't in any Federation database. Things that the Federation Council doesn't know about because they don't need to know about them. That's not how the Federation works, Jake protested. We share information. We operate under joint command structures. Not always, Lisa said quietly. Not when it comes to certain matters of galactic security. Zixtel looked up from his console. Captain, the energy barrier extends for thousands of light years along the human border. The computational power required to maintain something of this scale would be enormous. Chikara added, the communication signals we detected suggest there are hundreds of installations along the border. This isn't just a simple defense grid. This is something much larger. Jake stared at the view screen where the coordinates for their meeting point were displayed. Everything he thought he knew about human space, about the Federation, about the very nature of their peaceful galaxy was beginning to shift. Lisa, what's really out there beyond human space? Lisa met his eyes with an expression that mixed regret with determination. Jake, there are some questions that change everything once you learn the answers. Are you sure you want to know? The question hung between them like a bridge spanning an abyss. Jake realized that whatever lay beyond human space, whatever the Terran Deep Space Defense Grid was protecting, it was something that had been kept secret from the entire Federation. The decision he made now would determine not just the fate of his mission, but possibly the fate of his crew and his career. Set. Course for the coordinates, he said finally. I think it's time we learned what humans have been hiding from the rest of the galaxy. Admiral Kate Stevens materialized in the Constellation's briefing room via quantum hologram, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. Her uniform bore insignia that Jake didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to represent something far beyond the normal Federation military structure. Her eyes held the weight of knowledge that seemed almost too heavy for one person to bear, and her face showed the kind of weariness that came from years of carrying impossible burdens. "Captain Morrison, your survey mission ends here," she began, without any pleasantries or diplomatic niceties. "What you've discovered is classified at the highest levels of human government and Federation leadership." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "With respect, Admiral, the Federation has a right to know what's in the unexplored regions of space. We're all part of the same galactic community." Stephen's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the person beneath the military authority. "Captain, the regions aren't unexplored. They're quarantined." She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the briefing room. The image showed what appeared to be the true extent of mapped space, but this version was completely different from any galactic chart Jake had ever seen. Beyond human territory lay vast regions marked with symbols he had never encountered before. These weren't the usual notations for unexplored space or dangerous stellar phenomena. These symbols carried an ominous quality that made Jake's skin crawl just looking at them. 60 years ago, before we joined the Federation, humanity encountered something in the void beyond our space, Stevens continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a nightmare. "We called them the Devourers. They don't just conquer worlds, Captain. They consume them. Every trace of life, every atom of matter, every quantum of energy. They turn entire star systems into nothing more than cold, empty space." Lisa stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "The barrier isn't to keep us in, Captain. It's to keep them out." Commander Zixtel's normally composed demeanor cracked, his blue skin taking on a grayish tint. "You mean to tell us that humanity has been fighting a war for 60 years and never told the Federation?" "Not fighting," Stevens corrected, her voice carrying a grimness that chilled everyone in the room. "Holding the line?" Jake stared at the holographic display, trying to process what he was seeing. The symbols marking the quarantined regions seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the map itself was trying to warn him of the dangers they represented. "Why didn't you tell us? Why keep this secret from the Federation?" Stevens manipulated the hologram, zooming in on specific regions where the Devour presence was marked. "Because, Captain, panic would have destroyed the Federation before the Devourers ever had a chance to. When we first encountered them, we tried to warn the few species we had contact with at the time. The Altarians evacuated 17 colonies based on our warnings. The Centauri Republic diverted their entire fleet to defensive positions, but it wasn't enough." The hologram shifted to show historical data, star charts from 60 years ago that showed systems that no longer existed on any current map. "The Devourers don't just destroy," Stevens explained. "They erase. When they consume a star system, it's as if that system never existed. The gravitational effects disappear. The light from those stars stops reaching neighboring worlds. It's not destruction in any conventional sense. It's a complete removal from reality." Chikara's compound eyes were wide with terror. "How many systems have they consumed?" "Over 300, Stevens replied quietly. "Each one containing billions of lives. We've been able to contain them, but the cost has been enormous." Jake felt the weight of the revelation settling over him like a heavy blanket. "The barrier, how does it work?" "Quantum resonance technology," Lisa answered. "It creates a field that prevents the Devourers from fully entering our dimensional space. As long as the barrier holds, they can't consume matter in our reality." Stevens nodded, "But maintaining it requires constant vigilance. We have installations along the entire border, each one manned by volunteers who understand that they're the only thing standing between the Devourers and the rest of the galaxy." "Volunteers?" Jake asked. "Every person who serves on the defense grid knows the risks," Stevens explained. "We can't conscript people for this kind of duty. It has to be a choice to stand guard at the edge of existence itself." The hologram showed the massive scale of the operation. Hundreds of space stations, thousands of ships, and millions of personnel all dedicated to maintaining the barrier. The resources required were staggering, representing a significant portion of human industrial capacity. The Federation could help, Zixtel said. With their combined resources, surely the burden could be shared. Stevens shook her head slowly. The Devourers don't just consume matter and energy. They consume information, memories, knowledge. If they ever broke through the barrier, they wouldn't just destroy the galaxy, they would erase every trace that it ever existed. The fewer people who know about them, the safer everyone is. Jake looked around the room at his crew. Each face showed the same mix of horror and understanding. They were being offered a choice that would change their lives forever? What happens to us now? Jake asked. We can't just pretend we never learned. About this, no, you can't, Stevens agreed. Which is why you have a decision to make. You can request transfer to non-sensitive duties and spend the rest of your careers knowing that everything you do is insignificant compared to what's happening out here, or you can volunteer for the defense grid and help humanity hold the line. The room fell silent as the weight of the choice settled over them. Jake looked at each of his crew members, seeing the struggle in their eyes. They had come out here expecting to map empty space and update star charts. Instead, they had discovered that their peaceful galaxy was protected by humans who had taken on the burden of guarding against something that could erase existence itself. How long do we have to decide? Jake asked. Stephen's expression was sympathetic but firm. Captain, some decisions can't wait. The Devourers are always testing the barrier, always looking for weaknesses. Every day we delay could be the day they find a way through. Jake realized that his comfortable life as a Federation survey captain was over. Whether he joined the defense grid or returned to normal duties, nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy he thought he knew was built on a foundation of human sacrifice that the rest of the Federation could never be allowed to discover. The deeper briefing took place in a secure facility on Luna, hidden beneath the moon's surface in chambers that officially didn't exist. Jake and his senior staff were granted temporary security clearance that came with the understanding that they would never be allowed to return to normal Federation service. The knowledge they were about to receive would change them forever, making them part of a secret that humanity had carried alone for 60 years. General Ryan Cooper, director of the Terran Defense Initiative, stood before a massive tactical display, showing the true scope of the conflict. The map revealed hundreds of human installations along the barrier, each one a fortress in an impossible war. The display was three-dimensional, showing not just the positions of defensive installations, but also the energy patterns of the barrier itself and the dark regions beyond where the Devourers waited. The Devourers first appeared in the Kepler 442 system in 2087, Cooper explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed horrors beyond imagination. We had a small research station there, studying the effects of binary star systems on planetary formation. Within 6 months, they had consumed everything. Not just the planets, but the star itself. The system became a void in space, a hole, in reality that our sensors couldn't penetrate. Captain Amy Davis, who had been assigned as Jake's new military liaison, added details that made the situation even more terrifying. We tried everything. Conventional weapons, nuclear weapons, antimatter warheads, nothing worked. The Devourers seemed to absorb energy and matter equally, growing stronger with each attack. Our military commanders realized we weren't fighting an enemy in any traditional sense. We were fighting entropy itself. The holographic display shifted to show the early human response to the Devourer threat. Jake watched as the tactical map displayed the desperate retreat of human forces, the evacuation of entire star systems, and the gradual realization that conventional military tactics were useless against an enemy that could consume the very weapons fired at them. The first barrier was built around the Sol system, Cooper continued. We thought we could protect Earth and maybe a few other core worlds, but the Devourers didn't stop. They kept consuming, kept expanding, turning more and more space into empty void. We realized that if we didn't stop them, they would eventually consume everything. Lisa, who had been quietly listening, stepped forward. The breakthrough came when Dr. Margaret Kane discovered that the Devourers existed partially outside normal spacetime. They could consume matter and energy so efficiently because they weren't entirely bound by the laws of physics that govern our reality. The tactical display showed the construction of the current barrier, a process that had taken decades and required innovations in technology that pushed human science to its absolute limits. Thousands of human ships, weapons platforms, and technological installations spread across a front that spanned dozens of light years. The barrier isn't just a defensive measure, Cooper continued. It's a prison. We've contained them, but at a cost. Every day, human crews man those stations, knowing they're the only thing standing between the Devourers and the rest of the galaxy. Many of them never return home. Jake stared at the display, his mind struggling to process the scale of the operation. The resources required for this must be enormous. How has humanity managed to maintain this for 60 years? By making sacrifices that no other species should have to make, Amy replied. 90% of human industrial capacity goes toward maintaining the barrier. Our entire civilization has been reorganized around this single mission. We've had to develop technologies that are centuries ahead of anything else in the galaxy just to survive. The holographic display zoomed in on specific installations along the barrier. Jake could see the massive space stations, each one the size of a small city, bristling with weapons and technology he couldn't even identify. The people working on these stations lived their entire lives on the edge of the void, knowing that a single failure could doom not just themselves, but the entire galaxy. Why didn't you tell the Federation? Zixtal asked, his scientific mind struggling to understand the reasoning behind such secrecy. Surely, with their combined resources, the burden could be shared. Cooper's expression grew darker. Because the Devourers don't just consume matter and energy, they consume information. Memories, entire civilizations' worth of knowledge. Every piece of data, every thought, every cultural achievement gets erased when they consume a system. If they ever broke through, they wouldn't just destroy the galaxy. They would erase it from existence itself. The implications of this revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. You mean that if more people knew about them, it would make the threat worse? Exactly, Cooper confirmed. The Devourers seem to be drawn to consciousness, to organize thought and knowledge. The more minds that know about them, the stronger they become. We've learned that maintaining the secret isn't just about preventing panic. It's about preventing the Devourers from growing more powerful. Amy activated another section of the display, showing casualty reports and rotation schedules for the defense grid personnel. Every person who serves on the barrier knows they're fighting an enemy that grows stronger with each mind that acknowledges its existence. They serve in silence, knowing that their sacrifice can never be recognized or celebrated. The tactical display showed the current status of the barrier, with green sections indicating stable containment and yellow sections showing areas where the Devourers were testing for weaknesses. There were no red sections, but Jake could see that some of the yellow areas were flickering ominously. How long can you maintain this? Jake asked. Forever, if necessary, Cooper replied. Because the alternative is the complete erasure of everything we've ever known or loved. The Federation gets to have their peaceful exploration and diplomatic missions because humans have chosen to stand guard at the edge of existence itself. Jake looked around the room at his crew. They were all processing the same terrible truth. The galaxy they had known was built on a foundation of human sacrifice. Every peaceful colony, every successful diplomatic mission, every scientific discovery made by the Federation existed because humans had chosen to bear the burden of protecting them all. What happens to people who serve on the defense grid? Kikara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They become part of something larger than themselves, Amy replied. They know that their lives have meaning beyond anything the regular Federation service could offer. They're not just protecting their own species. They're protecting the very concept of existence itself. The weight of the decision they faced was overwhelming. Jake realized that his comfortable life as a Federation captain was over regardless of what choice he made. He could return to normal duties knowing that everything he did was insignificant compared to the war being fought in secret, or he could join the defense grid and become part of humanity's greatest sacrifice. In the days that followed, Jake found himself grappling with the weight of the revelation that had turned his understanding of the galaxy upside down. The Federation he had served his entire career was built on principles of cooperation and shared knowledge, yet humanity had shouldered the burden of defending the entire galaxy in secret. The comfortable illusion of peaceful exploration and diplomatic progress was maintained by people who lived and died in the darkness beyond human space, fighting an enemy that most beings would never know existed. Dr. Susan Parker, the head of the Terran Research Division, showed him through the laboratories where human scientists worked tirelessly to understand the Devourers. The research facility was built deep underground, protected by layers of shielding that could withstand attacks from weapons that existed only in theory. The scientists who worked here had dedicated their lives to studying an enemy that defied every law of physics they had once believed to be absolute. "We've learned that they exist partially outside normal space-time," Susan explained as they walked through corridors lined with containment units and sensor arrays. "That's why conventional weapons don't work against them. They're not entirely in our reality, which allows them to consume matter and energy without being affected by the usual physical limitations. But you found a way to contain them," Jake observed, studying the complex equations that covered every available wall surface in the laboratories. "The barrier works by creating a quantum resonance field that forces them to exist fully in our dimension," Susan replied, her voice carrying both pride and exhaustion. "In that state, they can't consume matter as efficiently, but they're also more dangerous in conventional terms. If they ever adapted to break through the resonance field, they would become unstoppable in both dimensions." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence that applied to every living being in the galaxy. Jake realized that the scientists working in these laboratories carried a burden that was perhaps even heavier than that of the soldiers manning the barrier installations. They had to understand their enemy well enough to contain it, but not so well that their knowledge itself became a weapon the Devourers could use against them. Back aboard the Constellation, Jake called his crew together for what he knew would be the most important conversation of their careers. The weight of decision pressed down on him as he looked at each face around the briefing table. Zixtal's intelligent blue features showed the strain of processing information that challenged everything his scientific training had taught him about the universe. Kikara's compound eyes reflected a fear that was deeper than anything her species had experienced in their peaceful expansion across the galaxy. Lisa's familiar human expression carried the burden of someone who had known these secrets for years but had never been able to share them. "We have a choice," Jake said finally, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. "We can request transfer to non-sensitive duties and spend the rest of our careers knowing that everything we do is insignificant compared to what's happening out there. Or we can volunteer for the defense grid and help humanity hold the line against something that wants to erase the very concept of existence." Lisa spoke first, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. "I already made my choice when I transferred from the Terran Defense Force 2 years ago. I wanted to serve the Federation, to be part of something larger than just human interests. But I never stopped serving humanity's greater mission. I thought maybe I could have a normal life, serve on exploration missions, help build the peaceful galaxy we all believed in. But there is no normal life when you know what's really out there." Zixtal was quiet for a long moment, his analytical mind working through the implications of everything they had learned. "Captain, if what we've discovered is true, then humanity has been protecting not just their own species, but mine as well. The Korvan people owe a debt we never knew existed. My entire civilization has been able to pursue science and exploration because humans chose to stand guard at the edge of reality itself. How can I return to my comfortable laboratory knowing that?" Chikara's response surprised everyone. The Hive Collective was known for their cautious approach to conflict, preferring negotiation and peaceful expansion over military action. My people believe that all consciousness is connected, that what affects one mind affects all minds. If the devourers consume consciousness itself, then they are the enemy of everything my species holds sacred. I cannot return to my hive knowing that such a threat exists while others fight it alone. One by one, the crew members made their choice. They would join the defense grid, becoming part of the shadow war that protected a galaxy that would never know they existed. Each decision was personal, driven by their own understanding of duty and sacrifice, but together they formed a unanimous commitment to stand with humanity against the darkness. Jake felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he watched his crew make their decisions. They were giving up everything they had known, everything they had planned for their futures, to become part of something that offered no glory, no recognition, and very little hope of survival. Yet they made the choice willingly, understanding that some responsibilities transcended personal desires. "There's one more thing you need to understand," Jake said after everyone had spoken. "Once we join the defense grid, there's no going back. We'll never be able to return to Federation service. We'll never be able to tell our families or friends what we're really doing. We'll live and possibly die in secret, protecting people who will never know our names." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. They were not just choosing a new assignment. They were choosing to become guardians of a secret so important that it had to be protected by anonymity and sacrifice. They were choosing to become part of humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, a gift that could never be acknowledged or repaid. 6 months later, Jake stood on the command deck of the TDF Vigilance, a massive defensive platform positioned directly along the barrier that separated the known galaxy from the hungry void beyond. The ship was unlike anything he had ever commanded, a hybrid of human and alien technologies that incorporated improvements suggested by his diverse crew and thousands of other non-human volunteers who had joined the defense grid over the years. The vessel stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, bristling with weapons and sensors that could detect threats, across multiple dimensions of space-time. Through the massive viewports that dominated the forward section of the command deck, he could see the barrier itself. It appeared as a shimmering field of energy that stretched as far as sensors could detect, a wall of quantum resonance that held back an enemy that wanted to consume everything that had ever existed. The barrier pulsed, with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, responding to constant pressure from the devourers on the other side. Beyond it lay the void where entire star systems had once existed, now reduced to empty space that hurt to look at for too long. "Contact on the perimeter," reported Lieutenant Commander Kevin Roberts from the sensor station. He was a young human who had volunteered for the defense grid straight out of the academy, choosing this life before he had ever experienced the normal world he was protecting. Sector 7G, multiple signatures attempting to breach the resonance field. Jake moved to the tactical display where the familiar dance of defense played out in real time. The devourers tested the barrier constantly, probing for weaknesses, adapting their approach based on what they learned from each encounter. Each contact taught the defenders something new about their enemy, but it also taught the enemy something about the defenses. It was a deadly game of adaptation where the stakes were the existence of everything. "Deploy resonance mines," Jake ordered, his voice calm despite the knowledge that lives hung in the balance of every decision. Pattern Delta 7, the weapons, developed through a combination of human ingenuity and alien scientific knowledge, dispersed into the void beyond the barrier. Lisa, now serving as his executive officer, monitored the engagement from her station. Her fingers moved across controls that managed defensive systems her former Federation colleagues could never have imagined. The tactical display showed brief flashes of light as the devourers encountered the mines and were forced back into normal space-time, where they became vulnerable to conventional weapons for precious seconds. "Barrier integrity holding at 98%, Lisa reported. "Enemy contact neutralized, resonance field stabilizing." Zixtel, who now served as the science officer for the entire sector, analyze the data from the encounter. The Devourers are adapting faster than usual. They're learning to resist the resonance mines. We may need to develop new countermeasures. It was a constant race between human innovation and devourer adaptation. The enemy learned from every encounter, forcing the defenders to constantly develop new technologies and tactics. The scientific teams worked around the clock, pushing the boundaries of physics to stay one step ahead of an enemy that seemed to have unlimited time and patience. Chikara, who had become the sector's primary communications coordinator, monitored signals from installations across thousands of light-years of frontier. All stations report normal status. The barriers holding across the entire front. In the quiet moments after the battle, Jake reflected on the choice they had all made. The Federation continued its peaceful expansion, exploring new worlds and welcoming new species into the galactic community. They held conferences, signed treaties, and built a civilization based on cooperation and hope. Scientists made discoveries, artists created beauty, and children grew up in safety, never knowing that their peaceful lives depended on people like Jake and his crew. The irony was not lost on him that the most important work in the galaxy was also the most invisible. Every day, thousands of people from dozens of species served on installations like the Vigilance, protecting a civilization that could never be allowed to know it needed protection. They received no medals, no recognition, no monuments to their sacrifice. Their names would never appear in history books, and their families would never know the true nature of their service, but Jake had come to understand that this anonymity was not a burden but a gift. The people of the galaxy could sleep peacefully because they lived in ignorance of the threat that pressed constantly against the barriers of reality. Children could dream of becoming explorers and scientists and artists because others had chosen to stand guard in the darkness. The Federation could pursue its noble ideals of cooperation and peace because humanity and its allies had accepted the responsibility of eternal vigilance. As another shift began and fresh crews took their positions along the barrier, Jake understood that this was humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy. Not their technology, which was impressive but not unique. Not their diplomacy, which was skillful but not unprecedented. Not even their courage in battle, which was notable but not unmatched by other species. Humanity's gift was their willingness to stand guard at the gates of the void, asking nothing in return but the chance to protect those who would never know they needed protection. The galaxy slept peacefully, unaware that their dreams were guarded by those who had chosen to live in the eternal twilight between civilization and the hungry dark. The galactic map still ended at human territory, and most beings in the galaxy still didn't question why. But for those who served on the defense grid, the answer was simple and profound. The maps ended there because that was where the galaxy's guardians stood watch, holding back the darkness that would consume everything they held dear. They served, not for glory or recognition, but for the simple knowledge that somewhere beyond the barrier, children were growing up in a universe where hope and beauty could still exist. That was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be enough.